The Committee on House Administration will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. Also, without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 5 legislative days, so members may submit any materials they wish to be included therein. Thank you, Ranking Member Morelli, members of the committee, and our witnesses for participating in today's hearing. Today, the Committee on House Administration continues our legislative oversight with Member Day for the 119th Congress. The Committee on House Administration is tasked with ensuring the legislative branch as a whole is operating efficiently and effectively. As a committee with broad oversight of many legislative entities, we often bring forward legislation that impacts our workplace and our colleagues here in the Capitol. From campus safety to committee funding and federal election law, every single representative is impacted by the work we do here in this committee. That's why it's critical for us to hear from our colleagues at the beginning of each Congress to see how we can work together to bring forward legislation that truly better serves the American people. In addition to our legislative oversight duties, the committee also assists member offices through fulfilling member service requests, programming for staff and members, and more. For example, during the 118th Congress, we completed 660 member service requests for Republicans, 750 newsletters on House operations, and a total programming attendance of over 3,000. We held a Member Day hearing at the beginning of the 118th Congress as well. In that hearing, we heard many great recommendations from our colleagues. We even were able to implement recommendations we received through pieces of legislation that passed this committee. For example, we heard from our colleague, Congresswoman Claudia Tenney of New York, about election integrity efforts to prevent non-citizen voting. I look forward to hearing from our colleagues today about a variety of issues this committee will consider in the coming months. I thank our colleagues for coming before the committee to testify today. I look forward to having a positive discussion about how we can work together to improve our institution. With that, I'll yield to the ranking member, Mr. Morelli, for 5 minutes for opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for calling this meeting and ensuring our compliance with the rules of the House. And I want to welcome all of our colleagues and friends to the Committee on House Administration. Our portfolio, as you've articulated, of authorities here is pretty diverse. We have considerable legislative and oversight responsibilities from the funding and administration of federal elections to the stewardship of our cultural institutions such as the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress, and we are ultimately a customer service enterprise. So whether it's the security of our buildings, the food in our cafeterias, the paint on our walls, or how we communicate with constituents, we oversee all of it. A responsibility I know we all take very seriously, and I would, as you did, a nod to the committee's subcommittee on modernization innovation, and that panel's predecessors in the Congress. Many ideas on improving the function and form of what we do has come out of that subcommittee. I appreciate all their work, and you know, we are ultimately the oversight entity of the House, and the place could not function without the thousands of employees who, by the way, often go unacknowledged, and we should thank them for the extraordinary service they do, particularly at a time when federal workforce is being subjected to some indiscriminate decisions by the administration. So I want them to know their efforts don't go unnoticed or unappreciated. I look forward to hearing from our colleagues about what's important to them and their constituents and how they think we can improve our service to the House. And I'm sure there will be no shortage of members appearing today simply to lavish us with praise and acclaim for what we are doing right. So I'm eagerly welcoming those comments as well. But thanks for your kind words. Thanks for holding the hearing. And with that, I look forward to hearing from our colleagues, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, all other members' opening statements will be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Today we have 2 panels. Each witness will give a 3-minute opening statement. Then the majority and minority will each have a total of 5 minutes per side to question the witnesses. We now welcome our first panel of witnesses, and I'll recognize you, Mr. Frost from Florida, for 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and Mr. Ranking Member, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today on 2 very important matters I hope the committee will prioritize as Congress. First, I will be reintroducing the Voting Overseas Treated Equally for Service Members Act, or the VOTES Act. I'm grateful to the members of this committee for their unanimous support of the VOTES Act when it was marked up last Congress. This country owes a lot to those who volunteer to serve And for as long as our nation has fought wars and deployed service members abroad, we've recognized the right of those in uniform to participate in the democracy that they defend. This is personal to me. I come from a family that's been in the United States Air Force since it was the United States Army Air Corps. Absentee voting for service members goes at least as far back to the Civil War, and that legacy continues under UOCAVA, the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, and the MOVE Act, which guaranteed ballot access to active duty service members abroad. The MOVE Act, however, was passed over 15 years ago, and today it's not just active duty service members who might be deployed overseas. And that guarantee of ballot access might not extend to some of the 760,000 reserve and National Guard members who might be deployed overseas for critical operation, training exercises, and national emergencies. The VOTES Act corrects this by ensuring that all service members serving overseas, regardless of their duty status, get their ballot in time to vote in federal elections. It's a straightforward bipartisan solution endorsed by the American Legion, the Enlisted Association of the National Guard of the United States, and the National Guard Association of the United States. I ask that the committee mark up this bill and report it favorably. I will be introducing it soon. Second, I'd love the committee to address an issue that would immediately make it easier for members, especially those who come from disaster-prone districts, to better serve our constituents. Congress should allow district offices to use their website and online platform to direct constituents to community organizations, resources, and services. When a hurricane hits Central Florida or a tornado tears through the central Wisconsin, our constituents come to our offices and our websites looking for help. And while we can help constituents filing claims with FEMA, we all know local and community recovery resources make the biggest difference, and we'd love to be able to point our constituents to those local resources. Folks come to us for help, and they deserve better than being sent away because their issue isn't necessarily a federal one. This committee could make that happen. Not all districts have the same community groups or resources, and each member would have their own discretion to decide how they would engage, but at least they would have the ability to do so if needed. This is something that the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress investigated and offered as a recommendation to Congress. Just like the committee passed a resolution to authorizing co-sponsored constituent service events, my hope is that we can make this change. I'm ready to help, and thank you so much for your time and important work. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Appreciate your testimony, Mr. Frost. We've had some great conversations, in particular as it relates to making sure that our service members are able to vote overseas. Ms. Lee on this committee, the chair of the subcommittee on elections in particular, has a significant interest in making sure that we're looking at additional updates to UOCAVA in this Congress. And so as that debate continues, we look forward to working with you. We appreciate your interest, and we're happy to work with you as we passed your bill out of this committee last year. And I think there's an opportunity as we look at UOCAVA maybe a little bit more holistically to make sure that we're making updates in that space that are needed. As it relates to your other point, providing local resources, this is something that we've been discussing on this committee, and appreciate you hearing your support of making that change. I think you're absolutely correct. When natural disasters, emergencies occur in a member's district, often our constituents, folks in our home state, reach out really not knowing where to turn. And often, as federal policymakers, we think through the distinction between federal law, federal resources, state law, state resources, local, and local resources, where if your roof just got blown off in my state by a tornado, maybe in your state by a hurricane, you don't really give a hoot which government entity you should turn to. You're just looking for help. And so providing that flexibility to federal offices is something that we're exploring, and appreciate your interest and feedback, and we'll continue to look at that opportunity this year. I yield back, and I'll recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Frost. You and I have had many, many conversations about the bill that relates to service members. I could not agree with you more, and look forward to working with the chair and my colleagues here, and Ms. Lee, who's one of your co-sponsors, and the vice chair here of the committee to get that done. As well, I think the issue that relates to natural disasters makes a great deal of sense. I think the challenge, in part, is figuring what the trigger is, whether there's a declaration of some kind, but I think we could work on that. And then the question of which resources do you direct them to, and how do you make sure that you know you've got a current list of places where you can do it. It's a little bit of a challenge, but I certainly think it's well worth doing, and I appreciate both your being here today and both suggestions, which I think are things we ought to take up. So thanks for your time. Thanks for being here.
Gentleman yields back. Recognize the representative from Oregon, Representative Salinas, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Stile and Ranking Member Morelli. I am grateful to have the opportunity to speak to the committee today on the Universal Right to Vote by Mail Act. And I apologize I am not able to stay for questions, but I am happy to report back any questions the committee may have. The Universal Right to Vote by Mail Act will ensure that every eligible voter in America is able to cast a safe, secure, and accessible ballot by mail in our federal elections. That includes folks who can't make it to the polls due to, as we've been talking about, natural disasters, age, illness, disability, or simply because they work 2 or 3 jobs and have limited schedules. My state of Oregon has been a vote-by-mail state for nearly 30 years. We have consistently high levels of voter turnout. Research has shown that voters from both sides of the aisle vote by mail at similar rates, so this bill would not favor one party over the other. It would benefit all Americans. This includes our brave and hardworking first responders who do an indispensable job. Their jobs are dangerous and they're difficult. Beyond the taxing physical work, they also require intensive work hours that extend beyond a normal work day. The amount of work they do cuts into weekends, public holidays, and yes, even Election Day. Given these circumstances, it's essential that first responders and all voters in similar situations are provided the ability to participate in our democracy. In addition to allowing every eligible voter to easily and efficiently participate in our elections, vote by mail saves a significant amount of money. Officials in my state have reported that vote by mail decreased costs by at least 1/3, which for our state is around $3 million a year. On top of those savings, vote by mail benefits the economy by improving productivity and decreasing lost wages because Americans can go vote from their kitchen table instead of waiting in lines that snake around the block. A report from 2012 found that the amount of time Americans spent waiting in line to vote cost over $540 million in lost productivity and wages. The benefits of my bill don't end there. It also includes a requirement that states must provide voters with an opportunity to cure their ballots. This is critical because voters casting their ballots may make errors due to a lack of access to an election official to assist them when they are filling out their ballot. The Universal Right to Vote by Mail Act would extend the access that Oregonians have had for decades to every American. It would establish a national right to vote by mail, which would only strengthen our democracy by allowing more Americans to make their voices heard. That's why the Universal Right to Vote by Mail Act is also an integral part of the Freedom to Vote Act. I encourage this committee to give this full and fair consideration to the Universal Right to Vote by Mail Act and to oppose any efforts that may arise to restrict access to the ballot, including any efforts to restrict the ability of Americans to vote by mail. Again, I thank you so much for your time and for this hearing. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Thank you very much. We'll go straight to Mr. Panetta, and then we'll come back and do questions at the end of the panel. We'll recognize Mr. Panetta for 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Steele and Ranking Member Morelli. I appreciate the concerns of my colleagues and echo their sentiments. My request is much more selfish, I'll be honest with you. Selfish to the people of my district in the 19th Congressional District on the Central Coast of California. We need more money, is what it comes down to in regards to being able to effectively serve our constituents. I say that thanks to this independent redistricting commission that used my district previously, used my district as hamburger helper to create the district to the east of mine, and therefore completely spread out my district over a wide variety of communities of interest, causing me to open up 4 district offices in the 19th Congressional District, which has been a financial strain on my office and on the members' representational allowance. And that's why I respectfully request your consideration for changes to better support members who represent larger geographic districts with a high cost of living and high property values. The changes that I'm asking for will enable members like me to adequately serve the distinct communities of interest and recruit and retain qualified staff. Now, my district, California's 19th Congressional District, which I provided each of the members a map of, just so you can get a little bit of the flavor of it, spans 2,817 square miles and covers 4 counties, each with distinct federal needs. And I think that's the highlight right there that we got to focus on. The communities in my district are separated by geography that necessitates offices in each population center. Without the 4 offices that I've opened, it would be very expensive and time-consuming for working families in each of those 4 distinct communities to access congressional services in person. In addition to geographic separations, my district make up several distinct communities of interest. You got South San Jose, which is a bedroom community to the commuters of Silicon Valley. You got Santa Cruz, which has tourism, hospitality, some agricultural economies. You got Monterey County, which has the specialty crop agricultural industry and a number of military installations. And then you go all the way down the coastline to northern San Luis Obispo County, which has cattle, wine, and coastal tourism as well. These counties and these areas are very, very different. And the people are different. And you know what? You can't really expect them to travel to another area, another community of interest within the 19th Congressional District. Each of these constituencies require local staff who understand their unique concerns in addition to access to physical offices. Additionally, due to California's redistricting, and as talked about, I've had to meet most of these constituents for the first time in the last Congress, which is 55% of the constituency, which was new. To add additional costs, the office rents in my district are among the highest in the nation. While I understand and appreciate that the CAO uses submarket rates to account for more expensive office rents, this calculation fails to account the quantity of offices needed. Unfortunately, maintaining multiple offices is more expensive and results in renting more total square footage than a single district office. Despite these differences in the cost of living, there is no adjustment in the formula dedicated to personnel as well. That means that pay for personnel that includes staff in my district, where the median salary is $116,000, is the same as Kentucky's 5th district, where the median salary is $44,000. If I may, thank you. Recent reports have also confirmed that the cost of housing in my district is among the highest in the nation. Look, I want to recognize your leadership for championing MRA increases, and thank you for the 6.2% increase that the MRA included in 2023. Unfortunately, for districts like mine, it hasn't gone far enough. I know I'm over my time. I think you get the gist of where I'm coming from when it comes to my type of district, how expensive it is, how spread out it is, how many different communities of interest that I have. Therefore, I'm asking for a change in the formulation for MRAs to take into account all of the obstacles and challenges that I have in the 19th Congressional District and provide more when it comes to the MRA. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Ramirez, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to testify today about how the SAVE Act could strip 70 million American women in the United States from the right to vote. Let me start by pointing out a fact some of my colleagues seem incapable of accepting. Non-citizens cannot vote. That is the law. Non-citizens do not vote, and it's a fact. My colleagues on the other side have decided to use this information to whip people into fear-driven frenzy to suppress the votes of anyone who threatens an extremist, unconstitutional, authoritarian agenda, and that includes women. As Chair Steele admitted in his testimony in front of the Rules Committee last Congress, under the SAVE Act, Americans would not be able to register to vote with their driver's license or real IDs. IDs do not meet the SAVE Act's requirement of showing a holder's citizenship status because, again, the fact is that non-citizens can legally access real IDs. So the only documentation that is acceptable under the SAVE Act that most Americans will be able to use are passports and birth certificates paired with IDs. Here's the problem. Only half of Americans own a passport, and an estimated 70 million women in the United States change their name upon marriage, meaning their IDs and their birth certificates don't match. According to the Pew Research Center, 80% of American women adopt their husband's name. And it's my understanding that 3 women who serve in this committee have also done so. So if they don't have a passport and their birth certificate doesn't match their ID, then what happens then? According to the text of the SAVE Act, these 70 million American citizens will be unable to prove their citizenship and would be barred from registering to vote. However, the impact is not limited to married women. There's also survivors of domestic violence who decided to create new identities for themselves and sometimes for their sons and for their daughters. They would be penalized for ensuring their survival. Folks, that's unacceptable. I've heard from Republicans over and over again that they want to protect women. So let me ask you, how is this bill protecting women's right to vote? The SAVE Act is not an election security bill. It is carefully constructed legislation targeting American women, targeting Americans, Black, brown, veterans, indigenous, and working class. And it's a bill to disenfranchise millions of Americans. It's part of an authoritarian playbook, including the funding freeze and the persecution of diverse cities. And it takes courage and moral clarity to stand against it. And so today, I wanted to speak because I want to invite every member of this committee and the House Democrats and Republicans to see this bill for what it is, to stand on the right side of history and to stand against the SAVE Act. Thank you for your attention and time this morning. With that, I yield back.
Representative from Illinois yields back. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions. Mr. Panetta, I was given a map of your district. It does look long and a little unique. And so the commission in California maybe has an opportunity to get some more compact districts in the state. Your point as it relates to the number of offices you have is well taken. And so appreciate you coming and testifying before us today. As it relates to my colleague from Illinois, I think there's a real opportunity to improve election integrity. And if you compare my home state of Wisconsin and the state of Illinois, the contrast couldn't be more clear. In the state of Illinois, there's no requirement for a photo ID. In the state of Wisconsin, there is a requirement for a photo ID. We could look to the state of North Dakota, where North Dakota includes in Real ID whether or not an individual is a citizen. And so that actually addresses the concern you brought forward, something maybe the state of Illinois could take a look at. I think there's some real opportunities at the state level. In your testimony, you noted that non-citizens do not vote. As we have shown in this committee, we've identified where non-citizens have gotten on the voter rolls, where in certain situations, non-citizens have voted. It's the reason election integrity legislation such as the SAVE Act is absolutely essential to make sure that non-citizens are not voting in American elections. And so to say that that is part of, as you noted, part of a, I'll quote it here, to suppress the votes of anyone who threatens their extremist, unconstitutional, white supremacist, authoritarian agenda, end quote. I would say it's common sense. Common sense to require an individual to show photo identification when they come to the polls, to say that they are who they say they are, to make sure that it's only U.S. citizens voting in U.S. elections. And if we look at liberal cities such as our nation's capital right here in Washington, D.C., which politically isn't that different than the city of Chicago. In our nation's capital, under current law, non-citizens are legally allowed to vote in municipal elections. And in fact, what we saw was multiple non-citizens participating in this most recent November election at the municipal level. So yes, it is true non-citizens cannot participate in federal elections, but we know that the radical left wants non-citizens to vote, and you can simply look at our nation's capital here in Washington, D.C., that is using taxpayer dollars not only to allow that, but to encourage non-citizens to participate. And so as we look at the contrast between states, I would offer that Illinois has some of the weakest election integrity laws in our country. And so maybe an opportunity to go to the home state of Illinois and to say we need to step up to make sure that we're providing election integrity so that a non-citizen doesn't cancel out the vote of one legal American citizen who's participating. And to say that non-citizens do not vote, that is a fact. We have shown in this committee that that statement is not true. It's why election integrity legislation is so absolutely critical. And with 2 minutes left, I want to yield to my colleague from Illinois, Ms. Miller, to comment on election integrity status in the state of Illinois. Ms. Miller?
Thank you, Chairman. And I would hope that my colleague from Illinois will come to the understanding that the need for robust voter ID and election integrity laws is essential. Illinois has a long history of electoral irregularities, and the citizens of Illinois deserve secure and trustworthy elections. We do not have those. I would note that the SAVE Act does have robust protections for married women whose names have changed. Arizona has a very similar statute on the books, and no one has been disenfranchised. It's very disappointing that my colleague from Illinois has chosen to resort to scare tactics instead of joining the committee's efforts to secure our elections. Thank you, and I yield to the chairman.
The gentlewoman yields back. Ms. Griffith, I yield to Mr. Griffith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Panetta. How many square miles did you say your district is? I'm not against you on that. I do have one suggestion, and I'm not saying that I'm opposed to your proposal. I have a district that's 9,000 square miles. And now I mean, you raised some other good points. What we do is traveling staff office hours, where we go into the municipal governments in the various, and we use the, various offices that they provide to us once a month where our staff goes in. And that's been very helpful. Your district is how long from one end to the other? How many hours does it take you to drive? Yeah, it's about 4 hours. Yeah. Mine's a little bit bigger, but not a whole lot, depending on where you're starting from. One of the issues that I think you're going to find with this new district, you may already have, is the prohibition on flying. And unless you take a commercial flight, now maybe you have commercial flights. I have no commercial airports in my district. And the prohibition, even within your own district, I think has made it harder for people with large districts to well serve their people. And so I would say we might want to be looking at that too, Mr. Chairman, as to whether or not, if you're flying within your district or within 20 or 30 miles of your district, to use some of the small commuter airports and to allow us to fly with people who, we pay for the gas, we note it all in our records for ethics purposes. But right now, that's not allowed, and so there have been many occasions, particularly on like 9/11, when I'm trying to get to official events and can't get from one place to the next in sufficient time, and am only able to do one or maybe two events out of 6 or 7 in my district. So having a long district does make it difficult. You do have, and you point out properly, you do have the issue with the fact that your district is a lot more expensive than mine. My household income is about $50,000. I know I'm over, but I would have happily taken my own 5 minutes. But anyway, I do appreciate that, and so I throw that out as a suggestion, but it does make it more difficult, particularly with the cost of having your folks living in a much higher expense area. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here again. Quick questions for you, Mr. Panetta. Were you suggesting it's both a cost of rental and the cost associated with having 4 offices in high expense areas, or were you also talking about staff allocations? Is it both?
Both, because, we're having to compete with these counties that pay a hell of a lot more than we do at the federal level, yet the cost of living is ridiculously high, and therefore it's trying to balance and trying to recruit and retain talent that keeps on getting sucked up into these county offices or state offices that are paying a lot more than we are, because that's how they can afford to live in such an expensive area.
So you're essentially, I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but some adjustment for everyone's MRA based on a baseline and then what the additional cost or lower cost of living is. So if you start with an average, and then if you're in an area that's below average, you get a lower MRA, and if you're in is that essentially what you're suggesting?
Exactly, Ranking Member.
Some factor.
Please, yes, that's exactly it. Something to take into account the subjective factors that are there in each district that really kind of make it different than if you just kind of threw them all together, which they do now. Like I said, the comparison of the Kentucky's 5th district versus California's 19th congressional district, with the cost of living, as Mr. Griffith talked about, how expensive it is, it just makes it very, very difficult. And to have a district, like I said, not just geographically bigger, but the different communities of interest that have different service needs, you really got to go into those communities and stay in those communities, and they appreciate that, and they deserve that.
Thank you, thanks. Mr. Ramirez, first of all, thank you so much for your comments. I think if there is an issue on which the two sides disagree more than the SAVE Act and election law, I don't know what it is. We try to work together on most issues. This is one that there is clearly a huge divide. And I would just point out, and I'll let you comment on this, but it's the question or the issue of non-U.S. citizens voting in federal elections only seems to be a problem when the Republicans lose, not when they win. I haven't heard a single thing or any examples of non-U.S. citizens voting. I certainly haven't heard of the radical left organizing anyone to do it this past year. I would actually argue the SAVE Act is an extreme, very expensive, and cumbersome solution in search of a problem. So, you know, we will continue on this committee to have our differences. But I wonder if you could share with me in Illinois, where you represent, how many complaints are you aware of this year of non-U.S. citizens voting in the presidential election that just passed?
Thank you, Mr. Morelli. I mean, I think you'd hear complaints from my colleague here who would be saying that. But when you actually look at the record, we don't have. First, let me make sure that people understand this, for those of you that may not understand the immigration system well. If a non-citizen would vote in an election, they would be prohibited to never, ever be able to apply for residency or citizenship. A non-citizen does
Let me
not
interrupt you for a
vote.
second. Isn't it a felony?
It is a felony, and therefore
You
they
risk
are
deportation.
prohibited in any way to ever apply for a green card or a pathway to citizenship if they voted. This is the scare tactics that are being used, but really it's about the women. I mean, for example, in Chair Steele's district, we have 162,000 women who would now have to figure out how to bring a birth certificate if their real ID doesn't prove that they are a citizen. I mean, really, this is really about voter suppression and this boogeyman thing that if you put the word immigrant in a bill, it will force people to vote one way.
I did note, to your point, if you're a woman, my wife made the decision to take my name when we got married. On her birth certificate, the name Morelli wouldn't appear.
That's right.
So she'd have to assume she'd have to bring a marriage license. She does have a passport, but to your point, half of the American public does not have a passport. So now to register, you can't do it by mail. You'd have to go to a local board of elections, so that eliminates campuses having voter registration drives or vote by or register by mail. But you'd also have to have a slew of documentation to prove you're an American citizen, to prove that you are who you say you are, which adds all types of obstacles to the ability for anyone to register, let alone to vote. And frankly, still, I haven't heard a single person post-election day on the Republican side say there was a massive amount of non-U.S. citizens voting in federal elections. So I agree with you. I appreciate you coming. We obviously have a huge gulf between us. My view, and I suspect yours, is that we should do everything we can to make sure that every single American has a voice at the ballot, and to make sure we use different methods to ensure that happens. So anyway,
right. Thank you.
with that, I appreciate both of you being here and for your interest in the work of this committee. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The committee will pause while the witness panel changes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We welcome the second panel. As we did with the previous panel, we'll give each witness 3 minutes to testify. Following the conclusion of the testimony, the majority and the minority will each control 5 minutes total for questions to our colleagues. I'll begin by recognizing the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Olszewski.
Thank you very much, Chairman Stile, Ranking Member Morelli, members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to provide and address a timely issue, the dedicated public servants who comprise our federal workforce, and the assault that we're seeing from President Trump and Elon Musk. These days, it seems far too easy to demonize these workers from afar for political gain. However, for those of us privileged enough to work here on Capitol Hill, particularly the members of this distinguished Committee on House Administration, we know better. Every single day, we see public servants working hard behind the scenes so that we can perform our constitutional duties on behalf of those we represent. Whether that's the audio and video engineers from the House Recording Studio, who came in early this morning to ensure this could be broadcast to the public, the Capitol Police officers and civilian employees who protect us while we deliberate, the world-class carpenters, masons, and other skilled tradespeople who maintain these historic buildings, the cybersecurity professionals who work around the clock, the attorneys, the parliamentarians, the clerks, and those who facilitate our legislative process. These public servants, along with countless others, are lucky that they have constitutional protections that shield them from the purge being unleashed by the president and Mr. Musk on the executive branch. However, the 3 million other federal civilian employees in the executive branch now find themselves scared, confused, and abandoned by the very country they have served for years, or in some cases, decades. To me, and I hope to you, I find this an incredible betrayal. Maryland is home to 140,000 federal civilian employees. More than 22,000 of mine are constituents in District 2. These are real people with real bills to pay and real families to support. Just as important, they provide critical services to Americans, ensuring we're safe when we fly, our food is safe to eat, and processing Social Security checks and tax refunds. Americans are in for a rude awakening when there is virtually no one left to perform these and other vital services. My guest tonight at the President's Joint Address is my constituent, Katie Stahl. Katie is a biologist who was recently let go from her position with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. She was hired during President Trump's first term to help farmers in Maryland. She was fired in President Trump's second term because she was in probationary status. And she was only in probationary status because she was exceptional at her job. She was promoted. Katie was fired for being good at her job. She received no notice, no severance, not even the documentation she needed to apply for unemployment. I hope you agree with me that this is wrong. Before coming to Congress, I served as Baltimore County Executive, where I led efforts to find efficiencies and cut wasteful spending. I welcome that discussion here too, but I also recognize that our employees are our most valuable resource and the best way we can identify those cuts at any level of government. What President Trump and Elon Musk are doing is not about efficiency. Their actions prove to me they do not understand that good employees are our best resource. It's my sincere hope that members of this committee, Republicans and Democrats alike, will join me in condoning these actions and pushing back against them. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity today.
The gentleman from Maryland yields back. The gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member. I'm here to ask for your support of H.R. 396, the Trust in Congress Act, a bill introduced by myself and Mr. Roy with more than 50 co-sponsors, Republicans and Democrats, to ban members of Congress from trading stocks. All of us in elected office should be focused on doing what is right for the people who sent us here, not turning a profit for ourselves. And as members of Congress, we frequently have access to inside sensitive information, and we make decisions that impact the performance of the market. Because of this, the opportunity for members to profit off of our positions is just too great. This presents an enormous loophole in health ethics rules that must be closed. As members of Congress, we generally have strict limits on our outside income. If you or I wanted to make extra money after hours by driving an Uber or bartending, there are strict caps on how much outside income we could make. But there is no limit whatsoever on members of Congress trading stocks off of their position. Again, a tremendous loophole. It is ridiculous, it is absurd, and it must change. Our bipartisan legislation bans members, their spouses, and dependent children from trading individual stocks while in office. Members who hold individual stocks will have the option to either divest those assets or place them into a blind trust where they cannot have knowledge of when they are bought or sold. Americans across the political spectrum overwhelmingly support a ban on congressional stock trading. Recent polling showed nearly 90% of Americans support prohibiting members of Congress and their families from trading individual stocks. With this legislation, Congress can take an important step in earning back the trust of the American people. This is a bipartisan and straightforward bill. It has been endorsed by numerous nonpartisan good government organizations across the spectrum. I am thankful to Representative Roy for his partnership and leadership on this issue, as well as former Representative Abigail Spanberger, who originally introduced the Trust in Congress Act in 2020. This bill continues to grow in bipartisan support and momentum. It is time to finally get it done, and I urge the committee to join us in supporting this legislation. I'll yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas, my friend and colleague, Mr. Roy, is recognized for 3 minutes.
That light up? Oh, there it is. It's lit up. All right, thanks, guys. Sorry about that. Mr. Chairman, appreciate the time. Thanks for holding this day. Seth, thanks for your words there. And I do want to thank Abigail for her work. She's no longer serving in Congress with us, but I'm not going to repeat what Seth just said. I co-sponsor what his remarks just were, but I would just add, let me just go through a couple of examples here. And I'm not going to mention by name because I'm not here to point out any member. This isn't about members trying to get personal. But we've got a Democrat here, 4,000 trades, $66 million worth with a 19% return. Republican, 1,925 trades, $167 million worth, 22.7% return. A Democrat, 575 trades, $91 million worth, 21.8% return. A Republican, a senator, 270 trades, $7.16 million in volume, 5.7% return. A Democrat, 186 trades for $13 million for a 56% return. That's a pretty good return. Should be following that particular Democrat. A Republican, 164 trades for $1 million worth. A Republican, 160 trades, $4 million worth, 30% return. I could keep going. There's a laundry list here that I could keep going down. I could go down and talk about a Republican that made 149% return in 24, a Democrat that made 142% return, a Democrat that made 123%, Republican that made 111% return. My point is just this. The American people, the reason it's called the Trust Act is how can the American people trust that we're actually doing this with the blindfolds we're supposed to have on? Like Lady Justice in our justice system. We're supposed to be objective. How can you be objective if you're looking at a question about breaking up big tech and judiciary, or a question about Section 230, or a question about healthcare policy when insurance companies and hospitals and pharmaceutical companies are rolling in government money? How can we have a serious conversation about defense when defense contractors are really not only rolling in money, they're driving half our damn defense policy? And we're all sitting here and everybody's trading these stocks. So all we're trying to say is maybe, just maybe, we should put all these things in broadly held mutual funds. Maybe, just maybe, we should say, let's limit the ability you can trade them. Now, there's some differences of opinion. We have some colleagues, another bill that's Republican and Democrat supported that has penalties in it. Let me explain why I don't think we should have the kinds of penalties that are in that bill. I don't think we should be policing ourselves here in Congress with criminal penalties being at the end of that rainbow, because that turns Congress into something it shouldn't be. But I am interested in saying, well, if you break these ethics rules, if we were to adopt this legislation, maybe you're no longer a chairman. Maybe you're no longer sitting on certain committees. We can police things and have penalties if we break those. We need to restore the American people's trust in Congress. We should not allow people to be profit by day trading while we're sitting here. We can do that. And the last point I'll make is, it's not in our bill. We could also adopt, what is it called? The 1031 exchanges, is that what it is? A policy where, you can convert all your stuff when you get here from equities and go put them in a mutual fund, but not hit the tax, implications of that. So a lot of things we can do, very open. I think I speak for Seth too here, that we're open to whatever, but the time's now to do it. And we ought to move. And I appreciate the chairman for giving us the time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman, Mr. Carter, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to present before you today. Thank you for allowing me to testify. I want to discuss some very important matters that I hope the committee will prioritize in this 119th Congress. Under the previous administration, the United States experienced a historic rise of drug overdoses and poisoning driven by an increased supply of synthetic opioids, such as illicit fentanyl and its analogs. Last fiscal year, Customs and Border Protection confiscated over 21,000 pounds of fentanyl at our borders. That's enough fentanyl to kill every American several times over, and that's just the drugs we know about. Illicit fentanyl overdoses, and please listen to this. Hello? Illicit fentanyl overdoses are now the #1 cause of death among adults 18 to 45. The #1 cause of death. However, I believe we have a great opportunity to make significant and sustainable progress in combating this crisis. In 2023, I wrote a letter, this letter right here, to the Food and Drug Administration calling for naloxone, an overdose reversal drug, to be available without a prescription. Now, I'm often critical, I think with good reason, of the FDA for what they don't do. However, I applaud them for doing this. They did that. They made naloxone OTC where you don't have to have a prescription to get it, and that's good. That's what we need. Naloxone nasal spray is safe. It's easy to use. It's proven to reduce medical emergencies, drug overdoses, and deaths by up to 46%. As the fentanyl crisis continues to devastate our country, there is no moral, medical, or safety-related reason for these life-saving overdose reversal agents to remain locked under prescription regulations. We must continue to expand the availability of overdose reversal treatments like naloxone, removing the stigma associated with carrying it and making it as common as a defibrillator. I have naloxone in my backpack. I carry it with me everywhere I have to go. I've never had to use it, thank God, but I have it if I do have to use it. Mr. Chairman, the Republican members, many of the Republican members on this committee today were over at the CHC. The CHC has naloxone by the defibrillator. Here at the Capitol, you've got to call the Capitol Police first, and then it's got to be reported as a medical emergency before you can get that naloxone. My request here is simple. Naloxone ought to be available here at the Capitol. It ought to be where the defibrillators are. It ought to be available. It's safe. You can't misuse it. Well, I suspect you could if you tried hard enough, but essentially it's safe. And we need to make sure that it's available. That's what we're trying to do. That's why I sent a letter to the Committee on House Administration, the Office of the Attending Physician, and the Architect of the Capitol, urging them to stock FDA-approved opioid overdose reversal agents such as naloxone in the House of Representative office buildings. In Washington, D.C., the drug overdose death is 64.3 per 100,000 people, one of the highest rates in the nation. Mr. Chairman, this is something we need to do. We need to make sure we get this done. I look forward to continuing to work with the committee to ensure that FDA-approved opioid overdose reversal agents such as naloxone are available and accessible in the House of Representative buildings. Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, yields back. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'll yield to Ms. Bice for 90 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Roy, Mr. Magaziner. Thank you for bringing this forward. As someone who made the decision when I was elected to Congress to sell all of my stocks and put everything into EFTs and mutual funds, I understand the scrutiny and concerns that we have about this. But here's something that I struggle with, and that is it is not just members of Congress that I think should be included in this. I mean, our staff has access to classified information if you have that clearance. If you are looking at the judicial system, there are many judges who are looking at court cases that are antitrust or otherwise that it could have an impact. So explain to me why we should limit this to only members of Congress and not expand this to staff and others to be able to, if we're truly interested in protecting the institution, it shouldn't just be members of Congress that are under this new legislation.
Well, I'll speak for myself and say that, well, that's why y'all are on this great committee, right? You take in this stuff and then let's work on the legislation, let's bring it forward, let's amend it, offer ideas, and then let the legislative process work. I just think we need to let the legislative process work. On the substantive question, The reason we didn't put it in the bill, and the reason Abigail and I didn't put it in a while back, was that we didn't want to eat up all your time, was that we wanted to focus on this one issue. And now, when you talk about judges, you talk about executive officials, agree. Staff gets a little more complex. We can ask these people to come in, work in our offices, but I hear you. I'm certainly open to it. But we wanted to focus on the core problem of members, address it, and then move from there.
If I could just very quickly, I think it's a very valid point. And, personally, I'm open to looking at including staff or certain categories of staff, looking at other branches. But I think something that we agree on is we also don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good here. Like, we want to get something done on this, and we can think of lots of ways to come up with the strongest version possible that may make it harder to pass. And so we just need to find that balance of something that is doable but also meaningful.
We have the election certificate.
Thank you, I yield back. My time's expired,
The
thank you.
gentlewoman yields back. Mr. Carter, appreciate you being here and testifying. I think you bring up a really important point of making sure that we have emergency services in the Capitol. There's always discussion about the best way to provide that, but appreciate your testimony and interest in that space. I want to jump back to you, Mr. Roy, if I can. I think you're asking the right questions, and I appreciate you doing it. When the Stock Act was passed in 2012, it was referred to 6 committees, Committee on Administration being one. The Trust Act last Congress was referred just to this committee, and so it's navigating through with our other committees in the House as well. Removing the appearance of impropriety from members, I think it's really, really important. One of the questions that I have, and I'll offer to you, but Mr. Magaziner, feel free to jump in as well, is how do we make sure in your bill that the blind trust is actually blind? And what I mean by that is sometimes in blind trusts, remove Congress, blind trusts in general, they have like 20/20 vision. And it really makes you suspect because now you've removed disclosure, right? So the current regime is a disclosure regime. An alternative method to provide the American public confidence would be a non-disclosure regime, a blind trust, which would by definition remove disclosure or it wouldn't be blind. How do you make sure that a blind trust is really blind?
Well, I think that's one of the things that we'd have to work through with the committee, bring in experts to figure out the best way to do it. There are ways, and different entities have set it up to make it truly blind, to create barriers between you and that individual. But look, I got to be honest with you.
But do you prefer the blind? There's kind of 2 broad avenues of approach. One is the blind approach, right, which is no one knows what's in the black box, including the member and including the American people. The other is a full disclosure regime, which is here's all the information made people. Both are good, and this is going to be the dialogue we're going to have here. But I think it's an interesting and worthy point to consider.
I do too. The only thing I'd add is if it's cleaner for us to just say don't do that either, and just say look, you got to be in broadly held mutual funds. Or, I mean, look, and I'm open to in regimes where we say, look, we totally ban the buy side. You and I have talked about this before. Ban the buy side. You cannot procure additional equities or options or whatever, but then you're able to hold equities that you came to Congress with, and that's all fully transparent. Maybe and you have to sell your or whatever, pre-market your trades.
We see that in many ways with the administration having different rules and regulations than we do. And I think it's always important to remember that any insider trading is illegal by anyone who engages in insider trading. And what we're working on is not to create a new insider trading law. That is illegal and should be, and people should be held accountable if they break the law. But this is also about the appearance of the impropriety in the first place. I know my colleague will have his 5 minutes, and so I'm going to recognize the time. I'll yield back, and I will recognize the ranking member for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of my colleagues who asked, I think, really important questions, and thank you to all of you for being here. I'll just start with Mr. Magaziner and Mr. Roy. As someone who's divested several years ago myself, I completely agree. I would associate myself with the remarks by Ms. Bice, and I think it needs to be broader. I do admit, Mr. Roy, I think it's a bit of a challenge when you're talking about staff, but particularly senior staff that are involved in conversations with members. It's hard to acknowledge that they don't have real influence here. I certainly think extending this to the judiciary makes a great deal of sense. I'm not sure I totally agree that a blind trust and disclosure are binary questions. There could be a way to have an administrator of a blind trust disclose. Question is, who gets to look at it, et cetera. I think there's ways to maybe work that difference out, but I think it's worthy to have that conversation. I'm just sort of curious. I'm not sure I understand why Mr. Roy, you take the position there'd be no criminal sanctions. I'm not sure I understand that. So I don't know if you could shed a little light on that for me.
Well, and first of all, I also want
I
to
mean,
make
I'd
sure.
prefer that no one breaks the law, so we
Yeah.
don't have to, but I
I don't want to monopolize the time. I want to let Seth jump in on this. I'll just answer that question for me
Yeah.
in saying, I think it is a dangerous place when Congress gets into policing ourselves with respect to criminal type activity. And when you start attaching fines or you start attaching things that start to go into that realm, we spend our time policing each other as opposed to acknowledging an ethics violation, allowing the people to decide that in the election, and or potentially, like I said, with your chairmanships, your power that we do have the power to dole out. Due process matters. And look, I appreciated my friend Jamie Raskin, who in Judiciary Committee the other day said he didn't vote for the removal of one of our members of Congress, Mr. Santos, because he didn't think he had due process. I'm not here to debate that. I understand differences of opinion. I just think we ought to be careful with that approach.
Yeah.
Give Seth a moment.
Mr. Magaziner?
Respond to that, and then, if you don't mind, quickly respond to the chairman's questions as well. So, the way I think about all of these questions is we want something that is strong and meaningful, but also achievable. Like, I don't want the perfect be the enemy of the good here. And so in the context of penalties, we want penalties that are meaningful. We want penalties that will be painful, but not to the point that we can't get something passed, right? And so realistically, I'm skeptical that members are going to vote for something that's going to potentially lead to, them being thrown in jail or criminally prosecuted if their spouse accidentally, executes a trade or something like that, right? But we can have penalties that are meaningful and strong, perhaps internal to the House. You lose your committee assignments, something. We can work together on what is meaningful but also achievable. But I think we got to find that right balance.
Yeah.
But there should be some meaningful penalties. And then just quickly, I would just say that what we have seen since the Stock Act was passed is that transparency regimes alone are not enough, right? Like there needs to be, it needs to be harder for people to insider trade, right? Like yes, insider trading is already illegal, but it is just too easy for members to do it, and transparency alone has not solved that problem. Transparency has shown us that the problem is very large, as Chip alluded to, and I forget what your other question was, but I'll come back to it later.
Thank you. I will, before we move on, I just say, and this is just me editorializing, I think the compensation for members and reimbursement for members for expenses needs to be looked at in conjunction with that,
yes,
frankly.
Sorry, and blind trusts on that, yes. So we could look at making expenses related to setting up a blind trust MRA eligible, for example. I would also, again, just argue that, when it comes to blind trust, no system is perfect.
Yeah.
The question is it better than what we have now? And the answer would clearly be yes, I would say.
In regard to your comments, Mr. Carter, I think we just have to sort of figure out where the drug would reside, whether it's with Capitol Police, who are first responders, but I think it's well worth considering. And I didn't realize Capitol Police don't have it. Maybe they do. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's certainly worth investigating.
And if I may, excuse me, I've got a bill that would require naloxone to be available in all elementary schools and secondary schools in America. Wherever you see a defibrillator, you ought to see naloxone.
Gotcha.
Number one cause of death now for 18 to 45-year-olds.
Yep.
And it can be reversed. You can save lives.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate your comments. I just wanted to leave it with, or ask Mr. Olszewski. I'm sure I'm torturing. The chairman asked me, I said, I don't know, I just call him Johnny O, but just a quick description. When you were county executive, if you're looking for efficiencies, it seems akin to me right now as chopping off your foot to lose a couple pounds. What manner do you think is preferable? How did you handle it?
Yeah, and if I may, Ranking Member, just to make this bipartisan love continue, I'll associate myself with the remarks of Representative Carter and in support of the naloxone, and also have one in my backpack. We did a top-to-bottom review of our government, and we were already pretty lean, but we brought in an outside agency, not unlike DOJ, and it was called Government, I'll get the committee the name, Public Works. It was Public Works, and we did a line-by-line review of all of the things that our employees were doing, all of our programs, and our employees. They talked to the directors, they talked to the employees. The employees were the ones that said to us, here's where you can do things better and do things differently, and we realized significant savings in our local government.
I appreciate that. Thanks for the courtesy. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses today, 2 productive panels here in the Committee on House Administration. Without objection, each member, including the witnesses, will have 5 legislative days to insert additional materials into the record or to revise and extend their remarks. If there's no further business, I thank the members for their participation, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned.